Let's bring in Mo Egger. And before we get to what, the typical NFL talk, hello, Mo. What's Mo short for, if anything, by the way? Never asked.
Maurice. Maurice was named after my grandfather. He was Morris.
Maurice.
Spelled Maurice. But at a very young age, someone decided we're not calling a little kid Maurice. So Mo has been with me for a very long time.
I like it, and it's stuck.
Yeah.
So the obligatory question would be the Bengals, and before we get to that, I want your take on the March Madness Men's Championship tonight. Toronto, Ontario, Canada's Zach Edey. Zach is here. Mm-hmm. You're next. I know you're big in Canada. Zach's big everywhere. At 7'4", 7'5", I think. Do you have a rooting interest tonight, or thoughts on the big game in Glendale, Purdue and UConn?
This is the matchup that I wanted to see. When the tournament started, I was rooting for Houston for a very simple reason. As a lifelong University of Cincinnati basketball fan, the way they play reminds me of the UC teams I grew up watching. So I have a soft spot in my heart for the Houston Cougars. But I felt like UConn and Purdue all season long were the best two teams, and it's rare in this sport where we get the best two teams playing anywhere in the tournament, much less for a national championship. And so we get a couple of 7-footers. We get a couple of teams that I think can beat you in a variety of ways. We get the best two teams all season long. And, it's Purdue, which has long been defined under Matt Painter as a program that just hasn't been quite able to get over the hump. They've gotten over the hump to just get to tonight's game, and we haven't had a repeat champion since Florida in 2006 and 2007, and obviously we have that with Dan Hurley. So I'm really excited for tonight's game. Everybody's going to gripe that it's at 9:20 Eastern time on a Monday, but I think tonight's game could be special, and we didn't get a very good national title game last year with UConn. I think we're going to get one tonight with UConn and Purdue.
Outstanding. Thank you for the analysis. Now, with the NFL draft coming up, I got to think that's very much in your vortex and your listeners too, but the Bengals aren't drafting high like they used to. What are your thoughts going into this year's draft?
Well, they're interesting, right? Because if you go back over the last few years, they've either drafted, when you and I first became acquainted, they were drafting number 1 overall with Joe Burrow, and then the year after that it was number 5, and then the last couple of years they've been drafting very late because of their runs to the Super Bowl and then the AFC Championship game. So this year they're kind of drafting in the middle. I think they're in an interesting spot because you could argue, boy, there's not this huge, wide open, glaring need that if they don't address, they're not going to have a chance to win this year. I think regardless of what happens during the draft, we're going to walk away from the offseason and think the Bengals are one of those teams that have a chance to play for the whole thing if Joe Burrow is healthy for close to 17 games. That said, they need help on the offensive line. What they have done in free agency on the offensive line has been good. They took an O-line that in 2021 was awful, and they've made it respectable-ish, but they've done that using free agency. If you want an elite offensive line, especially when you've got a quarterback making the kind of money that Joe Burrow is going to be making, you have to build it in the draft. You're not going to be able to build a really good offensive line in free agency. And so that process, as we talk about the Bengals in the second half of the decade, they're going to have to figure out ways to organically build a really good offensive line. To me, that starts with the 18th overall pick this year. Now, they obviously have a tremendous need on the defensive line, too. They lost DJ Reader this offseason. That was a position group. The inside of that defensive line left a lot to be desired. And if you look at what's happened in the AFC North, Derrick Henry is now a Baltimore Raven. Nick Chubb is going to be healthy. The Bengals were gashed on the ground last season, and their pass rush up the middle wasn't very good. That's got to be made better. And it's a wide receiver deep class, too, and the Bengals have question marks at wide receiver. Tyler Boyd is not back. T. Higgins will be back, but is probably, I think the smart money would be on him being gone in 2025. And so who's the long-term replacement for him that in the short term can provide a little punch to an offense that is already pretty healthy at the skill spots? By the way, what was that sound behind you? Are the cops coming?
I wanted to let you know that's me, not you. Something's going on in Boca Raton, Florida. I don't know why, but it's certainly not me.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the AFC North. We've often said how entertaining that division is.
Yeah.
Sorry, how tough that division is. We all know that.
Mhm.
But now entertaining, too, with just a lot of weird stuff going on. You mentioned Henry there, but Deshaun Watson in any division will always make it interesting. Is it the most entertaining division in the NFL right now?
I think it is. I think it's the most interesting. I mean, you look at the depth, right? Right now, I mean, heck, you think about it. Okay, the Bengals have their franchise quarterback. The Ravens have their franchise quarterback. Like it or not, the Browns have theirs, but the Steelers have the one who's won a title. Oh, and now they have Justin Fields. So I think the division obviously last year was great. The Bengals finished with a winning record and finished in last place, which I think illustrates how good and tough this division is. You have 3 coaches who have been to Super Bowls. You have a coach who has obviously been a coach of the year. There's a lot to like about the AFC North. It illustrates how tough it is to win this. So, yeah, I think it's top to bottom the best. I think it's top to bottom the most entertaining. And I think you can still make a case for each one of those teams to be playoff teams. I don't know that I can convince myself that the Steelers can win the division, especially if Joe Burrow gets through the season healthy. I don't think I can convince myself that the Browns are going to win the division. But, you know, again, I do think you could see a world where each of those 4 teams makes the postseason. I don't think you're going to see a world where all 4 teams make the postseason. That's kind of hard for me to imagine. But I think in Pittsburgh, look, they have gotten better at quarterback. Do they still have long-term questions about, you know, what that position is going to look like? Sure, but they have gotten better at the most important position. They have a Hall of Fame coach, great structure. On a week-to-week basis, they're really hard to beat. And so, you know, I think the Steelers are interesting. With the Browns, it's getting Chubb back, and from their standpoint, can they get Deshaun Watson through a full 17-game season? Joe Flacco lifted that team into the playoffs last year. It was a tremendous credit to Joe Flacco. I think it's also a tremendous credit to what they had around Joe Flacco. Baltimore Ravens, I think, right now can make an argument for being the second-best team in the AFC with where things stand right now. And if I'm getting Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins for close to 17 games next year, I'll put the Bengals in the conversation among teams that can win the AFC. So, yeah, I think the AFC North is extraordinarily good and really fun to talk about.
2 things. We have less than a minute. Moose wanted me to ask you about the Reds. Are they rocking? I have not checked the NL Central. How are they doing?
They're 5-4. They're really young. They're really hard to beat. They're really entertaining. They're really young. I keep coming back to that. It's hard to win while you're developing players. The Reds are trying to do better than they did last season when they won 82 games, but they're also still trying to develop players in real time. And those 2 things are really hard to do simultaneously.
You hear that, Canada? They have 5 wins. That's 1 more than the Blue Jays, and you guys all want everybody fired in Toronto. So, yeah. All right. Thank you, Maurice, if I may. We'll do it again
Is it
soon.
Is it Rodney or Roderick? What's Rod short for?
It's Rodney. It's Rodney.
Rodney? Okay.
So you're welcome to use that anytime. Yeah. Yeah.
Rodney, the Rodney and Maurice show. Perfect. Sounds awesome.
How about that?
Look what we're learning. All right, Mo. And it all started with you ripping the hell out of me.
No. It started with you ripping the Bengals, and then we came back after you, and now look at us. Here we are.
Approved.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks, man. Have a great one.
All right, man. You too. See you.
Mo Egger, ESPN Radio, Cincinnati.